On the early morning of February 19th in the year 1945, precisely at 9 o'clock, Corporal Tony Stein found himself in a precarious and tense position. Crouching low behind a shallow depression formed amid the dark, volcanic sands of Iwo Island. The terrain around him was a bleak, ash-laden stretch that seemed almost otherworldly, cloaked in shadows and ash from previous bombardments and the relentless jungle warfare. In his hands, he held a weapon that his sergeant had once dismissed as a stupid idea, a piece of equipment that had been met with skepticism and even outright dismissal shortly before. Despite this, Stein gripped it tightly, fully aware that it was now his only means of survival and potentially of turning the tide in this brutal fight. At only 23 years of age, Stein had already participated in 6 combat missions, each one more arduous than the last, yet he had not yet scored a single kill in the traditional sense of the word, fighting in an environment where enemies were hidden behind fortified positions. The Japanese defenders had meticulously fortified every inch of this small, rocky island, covering a total area of roughly 8 square miles. They had built an extensive network of interlinked tunnels stretching for 11 miles underneath the surface, staffed by some 17,000 prepared and determined soldiers. These defenders possessed overlapping fields of fire, creating a deadly web of machine gun nests, sniper hideouts, and artillery positions that rendered any assault into a horrific slaughterhouse, with death raining down on the advancing Marines from all directions. Among the few men from Company A, 1st Battalion, of the famed 28th Marines, Stein was among the early wave who managed to secure a position beyond the shoreline, pushing into the island's treacherous terrain. The chaos of the battle raged around him, with other Marines pinned down, desperately trying to withstand the concentrated, murderous fire emanating from camouflage pillboxes and hidden emplacements that they could not pinpoint or see clearly. These well-protected nests unleashed a relentless barrage that kept Marines ducking and seeking cover. By midday, the 5th Marine Division had already sustained devastating losses. 43 men had fallen, their bodies strewn across the ash-covered terrace beach into grotesque, twisted shapes amid the volcanic ash and rubble. The standard-issue Browning M1919 machine guns, which had been a mainstay of Marine and Army ground forces, proved effective in delivering suppressive fire. However, these weapons brought with them a series of drawbacks that hampered their efficiency in such brutal assault scenarios. Weighing 31 pounds with an empty magazine, the M1919 was a hefty piece of equipment, cumbersome to carry and maneuver during rapid advances. It could fire up to 400 rounds per minute, a formidable rate of fire for defending positions, yet painfully difficult to sustain during offensive movements. Its weight and firing rate made it less than ideal for the kind of mobile, aggressive assaults required to break through the heavily fortified Japanese positions. Corporal Stein was well aware of these limitations. He had been studying and contemplating the issues with machine guns like this for many months prior to this battle. His insights formed from watching firsthand the struggles faced by machine gunners during training exercises back at Camp Tarawa in Hawaii, dating back to November of 1944. During those drills, he saw the crews attempt to provide suppressive fire in support of advancing rifle platoons, only to see their efforts undermined by the logistical and mechanical constraints of their weapons. The gunners would set up the machine guns, unleash their firepower, then be forced to spend numerous precious minutes dismantling and repositioning their equipment as the infantry moved forward. By then, the momentum was often lost, giving the enemy a chance to recover or retreat. Tony Stein's background was rooted in mechanics and manufacturing, which set him apart from many of his peers. Born in Dayton, Ohio, to parents who were Austrian Jewish immigrants fleeing anti-Semitic persecution in Eastern Europe, Stein grew up in an environment that valued skill, precision, and craftsmanship. As a teenager, he worked diligently at a lathe in a local facility called Patterson Field, learning how to shape and manipulate metal with skill and patience. Later, he moved on to work as a tool and die maker at Dello Products, gaining a deep understanding of machinery, how they operate, their strengths, and their limitations. He possessed an innate sense of how to modify and improve equipment, an ability that would prove crucial in the extraordinary circumstances of combat. When he enlisted in the Para-Marines, an elite unit specializing in amphibious assaults, in September 1942, Stein carried his mechanical expertise with him onto the sands and jungles of Bougainville. His aptitude for tinkering and innovation became immediately apparent. During the campaign, he demonstrated remarkable combat prowess, even taking down 5 Japanese snipers in a single day, a feat that underscored his marksmanship and resilience. However, it was Stein's capacity for creative thinking and technical innovation that caught the eye of Sergeant Mel Grevich. Grevich had also been involved in the same campaign, and during their time in Bougainville in 1943, he was experimenting with a somewhat unconventional idea. He had salvaged an A&M 2 aircraft machine gun from a wrecked Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber. The A&M 2 was originally designed for aerial combat, and it was notably lighter and faster firing than the standard infantry machine guns. Specifically, it weighed only 21 pounds, making it 10 pounds lighter than the M1919, and could fire in a range of 1,200 to 500 rounds per minute, a rate 3 times faster than the standard. Despite its impressive firepower, the A&M 2 presented logistical and practical challenges. It was constructed for the confined, mountable environment of aircraft, with spade grips designed for handling while seated in a cockpit. It lacked a traditional stock, sights, or a method for a single Marine to carry and operate it effectively during an assault. It was a weapon built for strafing runs from a plane, not for direct engagement on the ground. When Grevich showed Stein the salvaged aircraft gun in November of 1944, the two saw the potential for something revolutionary. Both men had been reassigned to the 28th Marines of the 5th Marine Division following the disbandment of the Para-Marines, and they were preparing for a forthcoming operation that, from all appearances, was destined to be brutal and bloody, though its precise details remained classified or undisclosed to most personnel. Grevich had plans for adapting this unusual weapon, and Stein's mechanical expertise was exactly what was needed to bring such a device to life. Under the cover of night, in a makeshift maintenance shed, the two worked tirelessly. Stein took an M1 Garand buttstock and carefully cut it down, hollowing it out to house the buffer tube of the aircraft gun, thus creating a makeshift mount. He also fashioned a solenoid trigger mechanism from scraps of sheet metal, an intricate device that would allow a Marine to fire the modified weapon with precision, combining the lightness and high rate of fire of the aircraft gun with the stability and controllability needed for ground combat. These modifications represented a considerable leap forward, transforming an aircraft weapon into a potentially revolutionary ground fighting tool, an innovation born of necessity, skill, and a deep understanding of machinery. In this way, Tony Stein turned his mechanical ingenuity into a tactical advantage, aiming to solve the persistent problems faced by machine gunners in the savage battles of the Pacific Theater. His creativity and technical skill would ultimately play a critical role in a struggle where every second, every shot, and every innovation could mean the difference between life and death for himself and his comrades in the relentless, unforgiving landscape of wartime combat. In the midst of the fierce fighting on the island of Iwo Jima, Corporal Tony Stein demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and unyielding bravery by modifying his equipment to improve his chances of survival and success in battle. With resourcefulness and a sense of practical innovation, Stein welded a bipod, originally intended for a Browning automatic rifle, onto the front of his weapon, transforming it into a makeshift, yet devastating machine gun. To enhance its accuracy and effectiveness, he also installed rear sights borrowed from a Browning automatic rifle, enabling him to aim more precisely despite the improvised nature of the setup. This makeshift device, which they eventually named the Stinger, resulted from a series of rough but purposeful modifications. The assembly was quite crude by traditional standards, and its weight undoubtedly added a significant burden, coming in at approximately 25 pounds, nearly half of a typical rifle's weight, but it was designed to deliver firepower with destructive intent. The ammunition feeding mechanism was equally formidable. The weapon was capable of deploying a rapid, continuous stream from a large, 100-round ammunition box. With such capacity, Stein's creation could, in theory, unleash a devastating amount of bullets, enough to deplete the entire magazine in a swift 5 seconds of sustained fire. Stein's engineering efforts culminated in a weapon that he and a few others believed could shift the tide of close-quarters combat. They dubbed their innovation the Stinger, a name that seemed fitting for a weapon designed to strike with overwhelming speed and force. Stein personally constructed 6 units of this improvised firearm, one for each of the 3 rifle platoons that made up Company G, one for the demolition section, one for himself, and another for Grevich, his close comrade and fellow Marine. The initial reactions from the other Marines to this unconventional weapon were deeply divided. Some regarded it as an inspired stroke of ingenuity, a true testament to creative battlefield problem-solving that could give their unit a decisive advantage. Others, however, saw it as an outright danger, a lethal gamble that might backfire at the worst possible moment. A seasoned sergeant, examining the device, skeptically proclaimed that the Stinger's design would jam on the first burst, rendering it useless at a critical moment. Another, noting the slenderness of the barrel, warned that it would likely melt after firing just 2 magazines, making it a fleeting tool rather than a reliable weapon. And a platoon commander from a neighboring battalion dismissed the entire concept altogether, asserting that only an idiot would expose himself to heavy fire with a shoulder-held machine gun in the midst of an infantry assault. Despite these grim prognostications, when Stein took the weapon to the range for a test, he proved the doubters wrong. He fired a continuous stream of ammunition, firing an entire box of rounds into a designated target at a distance of about 200 yards in less than 6 seconds. The effectiveness of the Stinger became undeniable. The silence that had greeted the skeptics turned into quiet admiration as the weapon demonstrated its destructive capability. The command officers, those responsible for troop safety and strategic planning, approved its use after witnessing its performance, along with the battalion leadership, who recognized the potential game-changing impact it could have on combat operations. It was decided then and there that the Stinger was to be deployed in the ongoing fight, becoming a tangible part of the Marines' arsenal. Now, on the battlefield at Iwo Jima, an island under relentless attack, Stein tightened his grip around the formidable weapon, feeling the warmth of its barrel from the rapid fire that had already been unleashed. Around him, chaos reigned. Marines were dying, their calls for aid unanswered because they could not pinpoint the enemy's hidden positions amidst the thick volcanic terrain. Standard procedures called for calling in tanks or naval gunfire to suppress or destroy enemy strongpoints, but the tanks were struggling in the loose, soft volcanic ash that blanketed the island's surface. Meanwhile, naval shell fire, hampered by the inability to visually identify targets, was largely ineffective. Faced with this deadly impasse, Stein made a decisive choice. If you are curious about how his improvised weapon, the Stinger, performed amid the chaos and brutality of Iwo Jima's battle, considering the overwhelming challenges and the courage it took for him to act, then I invite you to reflect on this daring story. When you engage with stories like these, it helps us preserve and share the forgotten tales of heroism from the Pacific theater of World War II. Stein's story doesn't end here. Moving back to the scene, Stein rose fully upright, exposing himself to the full ferocity of enemy fire blazing from overlapping fields of machine gun and rifle positions. To draw the enemy's attention away from his fellow Marines and force them into revealing their concealed positions, Corporal Stein deliberately exposed himself in the open. He needed to see the muzzle flashes to pinpoint where the enemy was hidden, which was a perilous yet necessary act. As bullets snapped past his helmet and mortar rounds exploded nearby in the ash, Stein persisted, trusting his instincts and his weapon. Suddenly, through the smoke and dust, Stein spotted it. A fortified bunker, a pillbox camouflaged with volcanic rocks and earth, situated approximately 75 yards to the northwest. Its defining feature was a prominent protrusion, an opening housing a Type 92 heavy machine gun, barely concealed but clearly visible. Steadying his nerve, Stein lowered the stinger, aligned his aim directly at the target, and activated the solenoid trigger. The improvised weapon roared to life, its high rate of fire, roughly 12,200 rounds per minute, unleashed an unrelenting hail of bullets. The torrent of savage, 30 caliber rounds tore into the pillbox, causing its concrete walls to shatter and disintegrate under the onslaught. Around 1,200 bullets per second hammered the structure and the surrounding sandbags, causing the enemy within to fall silent. The barrage was so intense that, momentarily, there was no response from the defenders inside. Through the rising dust, Stein's sharp eyes caught movement, perhaps soldiers trying to escape or retaliate. Yet shortly after, everything went still. Without hesitation, Stein quickly shifted his aim to another target, a second pillbox positioned around 40 yards to his left. He unleashed another 5-second burst, filling the air with a relentless volume of fire. This second structure absorbed some of the incoming rounds, thanks to its reinforced construction, but the sheer volume of concentrated fire was overwhelming. The enemy inside the second pillbox ceased their firing, realizing further resistance was useless. The suppression of these positions was total. Encouraged by this success and seeing the enemy's defenses broken, Marines around Stein began to move forward. The suppression of the fortified bunkers had created an opening, an opportunity to advance. Riflemen, emerging from their shallow hiding depressions in the sand, moved with renewed confidence toward the enemy positions, now seemingly vulnerable. The sergeants in command shouted orders to coordinate the next phase of the attack, signaling that the offensive was resuming with vigor. Stein wasn't content to merely suppress the enemy. His instincts drove him to take direct action. With determination, he charged toward the first pillbox that he had just destroyed. Notably, the Stinger was considerably lighter than the traditional M1919 machine gun, which allowed him to run without excessive fatigue. Reaching the position in mere seconds, he prepared himself for the next phase of the engagement, ready to confront whatever defenses still remained inside or around it. Inside the makeshift battlefield, 3 Japanese soldiers lay sprawled on the ground, their bodies motionless, their lives extinguished by the relentless assault. The ear-shattering roar of Stein's weapon, firing at a staggering rate of 1,200 rounds per minute, had cut a destructive swath through everything in its path. The violent barrage of bullets had punched through obstacles, shredded cover, and indiscriminately struck any living target unfortunate enough to be caught in the line of fire. Moving with purpose and urgency, he advanced toward a second pillbox, a fortified position constructed of reinforced concrete, designed to hold off enemy assaults. But, alas, the outcome was no different from the first. The structure was still compromised, and 2 more enemy soldiers had fallen beneath his firepower. The position was effectively neutralized. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, Stein's grip suddenly felt lighter as he realized the Stinger missile was no longer responsive. The dreaded weight in his hands had vanished, replaced by an unsettling emptiness. The ammunition box was utterly depleted. A mere 100 rounds, expended in less than 10 seconds of sustained firing, had disappeared into the chaos of combat. Such rapid consumption of ammunition had been anticipated during his rigorous training exercises in Hawaii, where similar scenarios were practiced repeatedly. Still, experiencing it firsthand on the battlefield in these terrifying moments was a starkly different matter altogether. The destructive potential of the Stinger missile was undeniable, its firepower devastating, yet it was insatiably hungry for ammunition. Determined to replenish his supplies, Stein cast a glance back toward the shoreline, approximately 200 yards away, where the ammunition resupply point was located. That position was situated near the waterline, amidst the chaos of landing craft, still unloading supplies amid sporadic mortar fire that intermittently rained down from the enemy. To reach more linked 30 caliber rounds, Stein knew he would have to cross open ground, fully exposed to enemy observation and fire. Without hesitation, he broke into a run. The volcanic sand beneath his feet turned every step into a struggle. Unlike the fine, predictable grains of ordinary sand, this was loose ash, uneven, terraced, and treacherous. It felt almost like walking through ball bearings, as each stride sank several inches into the gritty terrain. With each step, Stein's boots sank about 3 inches into the ash, making progress slow and exhausting. Along the way, roughly halfway to the shoreline, he came upon a wounded Marine lying prone on the ground. The young man was a private first class from the 2nd Platoon, struck by shrapnel in his left leg. Despite the pain, he was conscious, yet unable to stand and move unaided. Without hesitation, Stein seized him, carefully slinging the wounded Marine over his shoulder, and continued to push forward. The injured soldier was a hefty 160 pounds, while the Stinger missile in Stein's grasp weighed approximately 25 pounds. His combat pack added another 30 pounds, bringing his total load to over 215 pounds, an astounding weight to carry through volcanic ash, all while enemy mortars fired nearby, bracketing the beach in a deadly dance of explosions and shrapnel. Despite these conditions, Stein pressed on until he reached the supply point at precisely 9:45 in the morning. Corman, another Marine, immediately took charge of the wounded Marine, helping him to safety. Meanwhile, Stein swiftly grabbed 4 ammunition boxes, each containing 100 rounds of linked .30 caliber ammunition. He hurriedly stuffed 2 boxes into his combat pack, gripping one in each hand for added security, then started back toward his platoon's position. The return journey was brief, taking just 3 minutes, but it was fraught with danger. Enemy snipers, ever cunning and vigilant, had begun targeting Marines who moved between the beach and the forward positions, their deadly aim making every step perilous. The sharp crack of bullets echoed through the ash-filled air, kicking up black clouds of volcanic dust around Stein's boots. Suddenly, a mortar round detonated roughly 30 yards to his right, unleashing a spray of volcanic rock and shrapnel that flew through the air. Despite the imminent danger, Stein refused to halt. He kept moving forward, resolute and determined. When he arrived at the position held by Company A's platoon, his platoon sergeant indicated a larger, heavily fortified pillbox nearby. This one was a formidable structure built of reinforced concrete, designed to house a Type 96 light machine gun, a weapon capable of sweeping the approach to the airfield. It was a critical target. 2 previous assaults on this stronghold had failed, and the cost had been high. 4 Marines had lost their lives in front of the pillbox. Without hesitation, Stein loaded a fresh ammunition box into his Stinger launcher and checked its belt feed. Although the weapon was already hot from previous firing, its lightweight aircraft-grade barrel was designed to withstand continuous fire. Confident in its capabilities, he stood up, prepared to confront the enemy directly. Stepping forward alone, he moved with purpose, aiming to neutralize the threat. The Type 96 machine gun opened fire immediately, its bullets snapping past Stein's head and chest, nearly grazing him with each rapid burst. Yet, Stein kept advancing steadily, the weapon's heavy recoil and continuous firing not distracting him from his goal. At approximately 50 yards from the pillbox, he unleashed his own burst, the rapid fire of his Stinger effortlessly surpassing the enemy's gunfire. The enemy gunner's aim was rapidly disrupted by Stein's precise fire, and the machine gun fell silent. Seizing the opportunity, Stein closed the remaining 20 yards and hurled a grenade through the firing slit. The grenade exploded inside, annihilating the enemy crew and destroying the machine gun position entirely. Explosions deafened the battlefield, and shrapnel sprayed outward. After ensuring the pillbox was neutralized, Stein turned back to reload his weapon. Once again, he faced the grim reality. The ammunition box was empty, an all-too-familiar sight on this brutal day. Having been engaged in combat for nearly 46 minutes, Stein had already expended an astonishing 300 rounds of ammunition in the relentless fight. The formidable weapon he wielded, the Stinger, was undeniably proving its exceptional worth on the battlefield, demonstrating unmatched effectiveness in suppressing and annihilating enemy positions with astonishing speed. Despite its impressive performance, however, it became increasingly clear that reliance on such firepower would necessitate a continuous and painstaking resupply effort. This logistical challenge was becoming evident with each passing moment. The weapon's voracious appetite for ammunition meant Stein would have to make frequent trips to ensure his team remained supported and able to maintain their momentum. Without hesitation, Stein launched his second run towards the shoreline, determined to reinforce his comrades and continue the offensive. During this effort, he encountered two injured Marines along the route. One of them was suffering from a severe sucking chest wound, an injury that threatened his very life, demanding urgent medical attention. The other had been grievously wounded by shrapnel, losing part of his right hand, which complicated his movement and survival prospects. Confronted with the harsh reality of limited resources and the pressing urgency of his mission, Stein faced a difficult choice. He was unable to carry both men simultaneously. Recognizing the critical urgency, he prioritized the most severely injured Marine with the chest wound, quickly running him to the aid station operated by the corpsman, who was trained to stabilize such dire injuries. After ensuring this Marine was in capable hands, Stein swiftly replenished his ammunition supplies before embarking on a third trip, specifically aimed at retrieving the second wounded soldier, who had lost part of his hand. By precisely 10:30 in the morning, Stein's efforts had culminated in a total of 4 trips to the beach and back. Each journey was marked by the courage and determination required to evacuate wounded comrades from the battlefield to safety, while also returning with vital supplies, ammunition, that kept the fighting alive. During this period of relentless activity, his platoon had managed to push inland by nearly 200 yards, steadily gaining ground despite the chaos. Their assault had resulted in the destruction of 7 well-positioned enemy fortifications, significantly weakening the opposition's defensive network. Remarkably, Stein's own combat tally now included the personal elimination of at least 15 Japanese soldiers, an attestation to his bravery and skill amidst the chaos. However, the toll on Stein's equipment and himself was becoming increasingly evident. The Stinger's barrel had taken on a discoloration from intense heat, a clear sign of overuse, and the solenoid trigger, a critical component, was beginning to stick, threatening to impede his ability to fire accurately in the heat of battle. Meanwhile, his boots, battered and worn from continuous running through volcanic ash and debris, were showing signs of severe deterioration. The soles were nearly worn through, the leather cracked and torn from relentless use, making each step more painful than the last. A sharp pain shot through his arches with every footfall, adding to the physical toll. Faced with the worsening condition of his gear and the urgency of the situation, Stein made a decisive and unconventional choice. He unfastened and removed his boots, kicking them off into the volcanic ash beneath him, going barefoot on the rough terrain. Though this decision seemed bordering on insanity, Stein understood the calculations he had to make. Every second counted in this life-or-death struggle. His boots, once a vital piece of protective equipment, now served as a hindrance, adding unnecessary friction and slowing his progress. The ash, abrasive in nature, was not unbearably hot in the shaded areas, allowing him to sustain a faster pace without the encumbrance of heavy footwear. In addition to discarding his boots, Stein also removed his helmet, a standard steel M1 pot weighing approximately 2.5 pounds. Although minimal in weight, combined with the now removed boots, this reduction in gear meant shedding nearly 5 pounds of equipment. This weight loss was crucial, as it would directly translate to increased agility and speed between the shoreline and his platoon's position. With these adjustments, Stein launched his 5th run to the beach, which took him approximately 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Running barefoot was surprisingly effective. He could gain better traction on the loose volcanic sand and ash, as opposed to the slippage caused by the rigid soles of his boots. His feet sank slightly into the coarse ash, but without the stiff, unyielding soles, Stein could sense the terrain beneath him, allowing him to adjust his stride for maximum efficiency. Despite the pain, sharp, cutting sensations reminiscent of running on broken glass, the increased speed was well worth it. During this run, he succeeded in dragging another injured Marine, this one wounded in the abdomen by shrapnel, down the hill. The Marine was unconscious, bleeding heavily, but Stein managed to carry him over his shoulder, delivering him safely to the corpsman for emergency treatment. After ensuring the wounded man was under proper care, Stein quickly loaded up with more ammunition supplies before rushing back to the position of Company A. By the hour of 11 in the morning, Stein's relentless efforts had carried him through a total of 6 trips to the beach, each one marked by bravery and unwavering resolve. During these sorties, he had succeeded in evacuating 6 wounded Marines from the battlefield, ensuring their survival in the midst of the chaos. He had also managed to bring back an impressive 600 rounds of ammunition, a critical resource for maintaining the offensive. Furthermore, Stein had personally destroyed an additional 5 enemy positions, landmarks of the opposition's defensive network. His platoon, riding on the wave of his determined actions, had made significant progress, advancing roughly 300 yards inland. Their current goal was approaching an important strategic target, the first Japanese airfield. Nevertheless, the resistance put up by the enemy forces was growing more intense with each passing moment. The Japanese soldiers had formed a well-organized and formidable defensive network, consisting of reinforced pillboxes, hidden spider holes, and underground bunkers interconnected by tunnels. Whenever the defenders managed to destroy one position, others would emerge from nearby, resuming their hostile fire in a continuous, seemingly unstoppable pattern of resistance. The battle was escalating in complexity, revealing the resilient and relentless nature of the enemy amidst the rugged terrain and harsh conditions. The Stinger missile launcher was the sole weapon within Company A's arsenal capable of unleashing a sufficient volume of firepower to simultaneously suppress multiple enemy positions scattered across the battlefield. When Stein took aim and unleashed his first burst on one of the stubborn pillboxes, the deafening roar of firing at an astonishing rate, approximately 1,200 rounds per minute, created a cacophony so intense that it momentarily caused nearby defensive positions to hesitate, shrouded in a mix of shock and awe. This brief pause in enemy fire was crucial, for it granted the riflemen the precious seconds needed to close the distance, advance toward the positions, and lob grenades into the fortified emplacements. Yet, even as Stein kept firing, he observed his weapons suffering from the relentless heat and strain of prolonged combat. The barrel, now glowing a faint orange hue, was a telltale sign of the intense stress it was under. The thin steel, originally manufactured to endure high-speed airflow during dive-bombing runs, slipping through the skies at hundreds of miles per hour, was entirely unsuited for the heat buildup encountered in ground combat, where there was no airflow to assist cooling, only the accumulation of heat from sustained firing. Meanwhile, the solenoid trigger mechanism that Stein had crafted himself from sheet metal while stationed in Hawaii was also beginning to falter. Though it initially functioned adequately, it was nowhere near as reliable as a standard, factory-built trigger group. Occasionally, it would stick, refusing to fire, or might trigger unexpectedly, firing a single round instead of a burst. To keep it functional during these moments, Stein had to tap it firmly with his palm, a makeshift reset, to ensure continued firing. Despite these mechanical shortcomings, the Stinger remained a formidable asset on the battlefield. At precisely 11 hours and 20 minutes in the morning, Stein's platoon encountered a well-fortified Japanese position that had halted the advancing forces from 2 other companies, effectively blocking their progress. This stronghold was a concrete bunker, built to withstand heavy fire, with 3 narrow-firing slits positioned strategically to cover every conceivable approach leading toward Airfield No. 1. Inside, multiple Type 96 light machine guns were arranged in interlocking fields of fire, forming a deadly perimeter. The enemy had already attempted to neutralize this obstacle using 2 tank-destroying vehicles. However, both had been struck by clandestine 47mm anti-tank weapons concealed in the surrounding terrain and forced to retreat. An airstrike was called in to eliminate the bunker, but the bombs, due to aiming inaccuracies or timing errors, missed their target by approximately 50 yards, leaving the structure still largely intact and operational. Stein carefully examined the position. The narrow firing slits, roughly 8 inches wide and 4 inches tall, presented difficult targets for conventional weapons. But the rate of fire of the Stinger meant that if he aimed at one slit and kept the trigger depressed, statistically, some rounds would penetrate. He decided to approach the fortress alone, advancing cautiously until he was 50 yards away, then dropping prone to steady his aim. As he opened fire, he emptied the entire 100-round magazine in a swift 7 seconds. At such close range, at least 30 rounds managed to find their way into the bunker through the tiny slits, silencing the enemy guns inside. Recognizing the opportunity, Stein reloaded his launcher swiftly and moved toward the bunker to assault it directly. He lobbed grenades through the narrow openings, causing a series of powerful explosions that killed the 5-man crew inside. With the threat neutralized, Company A's advance was able to continue unimpeded. Later, at 11 hours and 50 minutes, Stein made his 7th trip to the beach, carrying a Marine who had lost both legs below the knee due to a devastating mine explosion. The wounded man was still conscious, screaming in pain and distress, as Stein ran the entire 200 yards to safety while the Marine desperately bled into his uniform. The medic in charge later remarked that if Stein had been even 30 seconds slower, the Marine probably would have succumbed to blood loss before reaching help. On the return journey, Stein encountered an unexpected sight, that of another Marine carrying a similar weapon, the Stinger missile launcher, but with a marked difference. It was Gravich's other gunner from Company G. The man's weapon had suffered a catastrophic malfunction due to overheating. The barrel had warped and become permanently jammed, rendering the missile launcher unusable. He was attempting to bring it back to the beach, hoping that an armorer might be able to repair what was broken. Stein cast a glance at his own Stinger. Its barrel displayed a purple discoloration caused by the intense heat, and the wooden furniture of the stock was beginning to char from sustained firing. The bipod, true to its design, was loose and somewhat unreliable, but remarkably, the weapon still fired. Encouraged by this, Stein made his 8th trip to the shoreline at precisely 12 hours and 30 minutes, carrying the battered but still functional missile launcher and ready to continue the fight. Another Marine had fallen wounded, and the urgency to resupply was critical. Each trip he made across the hazardous terrain carried a significant risk, yet he persisted. By this point, several fellow Marines had become aware of the barefoot corporal's relentless efforts, how he repeatedly darted through enemy fire to deliver ammunition and carry out vital tasks. Some observers considered his actions reckless, believing that such daring was nothing less than foolish. Others, however, recognized a different kind of courage, one that transcended mere bravery and demonstrated unwavering commitment and resolve. They saw in him a man driven by duty and an unbreakable will to serve his comrades. Stein, however, did not dwell on the concept of heroism. His focus was sharper, rooted in logic, strategy, and the cold calculations of necessity. His platoon was in desperate need of supplies, and wounded soldiers depended on prompt evacuation, so speed and efficiency became paramount. The fact that he was barefoot allowed him to move faster across the rocky, volcanic landscape, unencumbered by the weight of boots. Moreover, the formidable Stinger missile he carried provided him with the power to suppress enemy positions and create a safer corridor for his subsequent runs. Every step was a calculated act of execution. He was executing a mission, clear in its purpose and devoid of hesitation. But everything changed during his 8th return trip. Suddenly, the familiar course everyone expected was no longer safe. Somewhere in the distance, concealed along the ridge line about 200 yards east of his position, a Japanese sniper had slipped into an advantageous vantage point, aiming directly at the supply route. As Stein raced back towards Company A, carrying 4 ammunition boxes, a sharp report pierced the air. A bullet had snapped past his head, startling him. The shot was alarmingly close, perhaps barely 6 inches away, and caused him to drop flat into the volcanic ash. The Stinger missile he carried clattered nearby, its metallic body landing softly in the ash. For the first time that day, Tony Stein found himself pinned down, vulnerable amidst the featureless, open terrain. The sniper was proficient, and timing his shot perfectly. He had taken a shot from an unknown position above, likely nestled in a concealed spider hole or behind a volcanic rock outcrop. Japan had trained their sharpshooters meticulously. They were patient, disciplined, willing to wait hours for a high-value target, like a lone Marine crossing exposed ground repeatedly, making Stein a prime target. Lying motionless for approximately 30 seconds, Stein fought to control his breathing, remaining perfectly still so as not to betray his location. The surrounding ash and terrain offered no cover whatsoever. The field between the beach and the forward positions was flat and barren, leaving him exposed. Another shot cracked overhead, and Stein realized the sniper was firing at where he had been, not at his current position. This meant the enemy hadn't yet pinpointed his exact location, but time was running out. Perhaps only 10 seconds remained before the sniper adjusted his aim. In a split second, Stein rolled to his left, grasped the Stinger missile tightly, and simultaneously rose to run toward the enemy, not away from his platoon, but directly toward the shooter. He applied a simple yet effective principle. Running perpendicular to the line of sight of the sniper would make him a far more difficult target to hit than if he tried to retreat directly away. If he could close the gap swiftly, the Stinger's rapid-fire capability would overwhelm the sniper's bolt-action rifle. 3 more shots rang out, all narrowly missing him. Stein commenced a desperate dash forward across the volcanic ash, barefoot, clutching the missile, with ammunition boxes bouncing in his pack. At approximately 150 yards ahead, he spotted movement, a figure partially concealed in a spider hole, hidden behind volcanic rocks, but still visible enough to target. Instinct taking over, Stein dropped to one knee and unleashed a barrage of fire. The Stinger roared to life, its cannon firing at a rate of 1,200 rounds per minute, shredding through the rocks and terrain around the sniper's hideout. The explosion of projectiles disintegrated the position, eliminating the sniper entirely. When the ammunition in his missile had been exhausted, silence returned. No return fire came from the enemy. Stein carefully approached the now-dead sniper's position, reloading his weapon with deliberate care. There was no sign of life. The enemy sniper was finished. The remains of his hideout showed heavy damage, with the Type 97 rifle lying abandoned beside him, its scope still attached. Stein took the rifle's telescopic sight, recognizing its potential usefulness, and continued his advance toward Company A. By the time he reached his platoon, at approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the situation on the ground had grown even more dire. The platoon had become pinned down by a complex and formidable network of defenses. At least 8 pillboxes arranged in a semicircular formation, their interlocking fields of fire covering the area with murderous precision. Every Marine who attempted to stand or move was immediately targeted by multiple overlapping positions, making escape or breakthrough nearly impossible. The enemy's strategic placement and the coordinated fire made it clear that their defenses were designed for maximum coverage and suppression, turning the battlefield into a deadly trap for anyone trying to advance. In the chaotic and tumultuous environment of the battlefield, a series of harrowing events unfolded within a span of merely 20 minutes, during which the company suffered 12 casualties marked by injuries and fallen comrades as they attempted a relentless advance across hostile terrain. The relentless assault required additional firepower and support, prompting the company commander to urgently request armored assistance in the form of tanks to break through the enemy defenses. However, the much-needed support was nowhere near immediate. The M4 Sherman tanks, the reliable workhorses of many armored units, found themselves immobilized once again, stranded amid the treacherous terrain near the shoreline. The culprit was the peculiar nature of the volcanic ash that blanketed the battlefield, a substance too soft and powdery, which proved insufficient for the tank's tracks to grip securely. Instead of forging ahead, these formidable machines kept slipping, either throwing their tracks or becoming stuck in the loose ash, rendering them temporarily useless in the critical moments when their firepower was most needed. Meanwhile, artillery support was hampered by another obstacle. The forward observers, tasked with directing artillery fire onto enemy positions from vantage points, were unable to establish clear and unobstructed lines of sight. Thick smoke, debris, and the chaotic smoke of battle conspired to prevent precise targeting, limiting the shells and gunfire that might have otherwise softened the enemy's defenses or provided crucial covering fire. Despite these setbacks, a soldier named Stein moved forward, navigating through the complexities of this dire situation to position himself at the most advanced point of the attack. From this vantage, he carefully scrutinized the enemy defenses, comprising 8 pillboxes arranged in a loose arc roughly 100 yards ahead of his position. It was clear to him that these obstacles were not mere static fortifications. They formed a tightly coordinated system of defense, interconnected by trenches that fostered movement and communication among the Japanese soldiers stationed within. Japanese troops were actively moving through these trenches, shifting and reconfiguring their positions, which indicated that the defense was dynamic, not just a passive barrier. This realization underscored the importance of timing and coordinated firepower. To succeed, it would be necessary to suppress multiple enemy positions almost simultaneously, creating a window for the riflemen to advance under cover of the suppressive fire. However, executing such an operation required Stein, or someone in his position, to expose himself repeatedly to enemy fire, risking his own safety for the larger goal of breaking through the defenses. Understanding the crucial role of suppression fire, Stein took decisive action. Rising to a standing position, he raised his weapon, the Stinger, aiming carefully at the leftmost pillbox in the formation. He squeezed the trigger and unleashed a rapid 5-second burst, firing roughly 100 rounds in a relentless barrage. The faraway enemy position was silenced, its occupants likely overwhelmed or forced to take cover. Without hesitation, Stein shifted his aim to the next pillbox along the arc, repeating the process with another concentrated burst. Each time, the targeted position was rendered silent, each bullet tearing into the structure or forcing its defenders into retreat. Stein methodically worked his way across the row of fortifications, suppressing each enemy position in turn, a relentless and precise effort designed to dismantle their coordinated defense. His actions drew enemy fire, signaling that the Japanese soldiers understood the pattern. Trench lines suddenly erupted with gunfire, rattling bursts from Type 99 rifles and Type 96 light machine guns, spitting lead and ash into the air around his feet. One of the rounds struck the barrel of Stein's Stinger with a sharp metallic clang, a sign that he was under active fire and that his weapon itself was being targeted. Yet, despite this, Stein continued firing, maintaining his assault until his ammunition was exhausted. As the final shots echoed from his weapon, he quickly dropped flat onto the ground to reload, seeking cover behind a small ridge of volcanic rock that provided some protection from the incoming fire. During these tense moments, his team members, riflemen from Company A, moved the critical 50 yards forward, advancing cautiously but purposefully in response to Stein's sustained fire. When he was able to stand again and resume firing, they pressed on, advancing an additional 50 yards, inching closer to the enemy while the suppression fire kept the defenders pinned down and unable to return effective fire. This seamless, instinctive coordination, an unspoken understanding, was born from combat experience. No explicit commands were needed. The Marines recognized the signal. When Stein's Stinger was firing, they could safely advance, knowing that the enemy's attention was focused on suppressing their position. By precisely 1:30 in the afternoon, the effort had borne fruit. The company, aided by Stein's fiery assault, succeeded in breaking through the formidable arc of enemy defenses. 5 of the 8 pillboxes had been completely destroyed, their concrete structures shattered and rendered unusable, while the remaining 3 were abandoned, likely their occupants having surrendered or evacuated under the relentless pressure. The aftermath confirmed the cost of this successful push. 17 Japanese soldiers lay dead, a stark reminder of the fierce fighting. Despite the loss of 3 more Marines from Company A in the process, the offensive pressed forward undeterred. However, this victory was not without its toll on Stein himself. His beloved weapon, the Stinger, had taken significant damage during the intense engagement. The barrel, bent slightly from the bullet impact, compromised its accuracy and reliability, and the bipod was shattered, rendered useless for stabilizing the weapon during firing. Though the Garand rifle in his possession was blackened and charred from the heat of battle, it still functioned effectively, providing him with a vital means of defense. Then, at exactly 1:45 in the afternoon, during their assault on the 6th pillbox, Stein faced a moment he had been trained for, yet earnestly hoped never to encounter. As he continued firing a sustained burst, a Japanese Type 96 machine gun found its target, delivering a devastating blow that struck his Stinger directly. The impact was violent and sudden, ripping the weapon from his hands and slamming it 6 feet backward into the loose volcanic ash. In that instant, Stein was forced to leap behind a low ridge of rocks for cover, now unarmed and vulnerable. The fallen Stinger rested on the open ground between his position and the active enemy pillbox, a tempting target for the defenders who had witnessed its fall. They now knew Stein was without his primary weapon, and they prepared to capitalize on this vulnerability, waiting patiently in their trenches for him to attempt to reclaim it. Stein's eyes fixated on his disabled weapon lying in the ash, the barrel still smoking from the recent firing. He could see that the belt feed mechanism, critical to sustaining his fire, was damaged, likely beyond immediate repair. Even if he managed to retrieve the Stinger, the chances that it would fire again were slim. The weapon's internal mechanisms had been compromised. Despite this, Stein's sense of attachment and the numerous battles fought with that weapon, the multiple trips to the beach, the destruction of over 15 enemy positions, made him hesitate. That particular piece of equipment had become more than just a firearm. It was an extension of his resolve, a symbol of his perseverance in the face of insurmountable odds. Now, as he stared at his battered weapon amid the ash, he was acutely aware that his situation had changed dramatically, yet his determination to continue fighting remained unbroken. Throughout the fierce and relentless battle, Stein's actions had been instrumental in ensuring the survival of his entire platoon. With unwavering resolve, he prepared himself to run out into the open terrain once more, fully aware of the dangers that awaited him, but driven by a deep sense of duty and determination. His goal was clear: to retrieve the important weapon that could turn the tide of the conflict. Without hesitation, Stein launched himself into the open space, his legs propelling him forward in a burst of speed, instinctively knowing he was exposing himself to imminent danger. In that very moment, enemy fire erupted with brutal intensity. From a Japanese machine gun nest, a burst of bullets ripped through the air, whistling past Stein's head and torso at close range. A single round flashed past him like a streak of lightning, narrowly missing vital areas. Despite the deadly onslaught, Stein's instincts kicked in, and he adopted a zigzag running pattern, a technique designed to make him a harder target for the enemy's gunfire, a tactic that had become second nature in the chaos of combat. Within just 3 seconds, Stein reached the designated position where the deadly Stinger missile was kept. His hands moved swiftly as he grasped the weapon, then rolled behind the protective cover of another ridge, seeking to shield himself from further incoming fire. Once safely hidden, he quickly checked the weapon's condition, noting that the belt feed mechanism was jammed. A round from enemy fire had struck the feed system, bending the guide rails and causing a blockage that could impede further use. Remaining calm under pressure, Stein expertly pulled out the damaged belt, manually cleared the jam using his fingers, and inserted a fresh ammunition box. With the new belt loaded, Stein tested the weapon by firing a short burst of 3 rounds. The Stinger responded correctly, functioning as it should. Reassured, he stood up and unleashed a furious barrage, emptying an entire magazine, approximately 100 rounds, into the enemy position pillbox that had previously shot the missile from his grasp. The deafening rate of fire consumed in just 7 seconds, effectively obliterated the enemy's stronghold, leaving it in ruins. The destructive firepower silenced the Type 96 machine gun that had nearly fatally wounded him moments earlier, and it was now silent forever. Refueling and rearming, Stein pressed on with renewed vigor, his focus unwavering. By the time the clock struck 2 in the afternoon, Company A had pushed forward an additional 400 yards from a shoreline, steadily advancing into the enemy territory. Their relentless assaults had resulted in the destruction of at least 23 enemy positions, with Stein personally responsible for the elimination of at least 12 of those hostile sites, showcasing his effectiveness and fierce combat spirit. During his daring and often barefoot runs back to the beach, Stein had managed to save 9 wounded Marines, risking his life repeatedly to bring them to safety across the treacherous terrain. Despite the chaos and damage, the Stinger missile, battered, overheated, and mechanically strained, remained operational, still firing in spite of the challenges. Yet, its condition was perilously deteriorating. The barrel had been severely deformed. Visible bends and warps made it clear that the weapon's integrity was compromised. Its rate of fire had diminished to approximately 900 rounds per minute, almost halving from its initial capacity. The solenoid trigger, a crucial component for firing, was now only capable of releasing bursts of 3 to 5 rounds at a time, even when Stein intended for continuous fire, which meant slower suppression. The wooden stock of the weapon, once sturdy, had become so scorched and charred that it was beginning to crumble, sparking concern about its long-term usability. By 2:30 in the afternoon, during an aggressive assault on a well-fortified trench system, the Stinger was struck again. This time, a single round fired from a Type 99 rifle hit the missile launcher at its receiver, the critical part that connects and allows firing. The impact was destructive. The force of the shot knocked the weapon from Stein's hands, sending it flying 10 feet away into a shell crater. Now completely exposed, Stein found himself vulnerable, with no cover and no weapon immediately at hand. Enemies emerging from the trench fired volleys of rifles and threw grenades, aiming at him directly. He could see at least 6 enemy soldiers, each ready to engage him at close quarters. In a surge of adrenaline and instinct, Stein sprinted toward the abandoned missile, desperately trying to reach it amid the chaos. Within moments, a grenade exploded just 5 yards behind him, kicking up a cloud of volcanic ash along with deadly shrapnel. Fragments struck his left leg and back, causing small wounds that were painful but not incapacitating, enough to remind him of the constant danger in every moment of combat. Without hesitation, Stein grabbed the Stinger missile again and dove into the nearby crater to seek cover and safety. He observed the receiver of the weapon, now bearing a deep gouge from the enemy round, but still remained functional. Fighting through the stiffness, he cycled the action manually, forcing the mechanism to operate despite the damage. Once the belt was loaded again, Stein took aim at the trench where the enemy soldiers were positioned and fired. Although the weapon's performance had degraded to perhaps 600 rounds per minute, only about half of its original capacity, Stein knew that this rate still surpassed anything else available on the battlefield. The suppressed enemy position was the result. His sustained fire kept the enemy at bay, while accompanying riflemen advanced, hurling grenades to clear the trench. This coordinated effort resulted in the elimination of 6 Japanese soldiers, their positions neutralized. The relentless tempo of Stein's combat continued into the early afternoon. By precisely 4 o'clock, he had made his 8th trip back and forth to the beach, a testament to his stamina and dedication. Throughout these excursions, Stein had fired over 2,000 rounds, with each trip also involving the urgent task of carrying wounded Marines back from the front lines. His feet, exposed to the scorching volcanic ash, bled from running barefoot, their soles torn and battered. His uniform was drenched with sweat, soaked through with the blood of those he carried, a vivid symbol of the fierce and personal nature of this battle. Despite the immense physical toll, Stein's resolve never waned. He knew that every shot, every rescue, and every risk taken contributed directly to the success of their mission and the survival of his comrades. The Stinger missile, by that point in the battle, was barely functional and showed clear signs of its age and extensive use. Its metal barrel was no longer straight, but had been bent at an awkward 5-degree angle, making aiming and firing much more difficult than it should have been. The stock of the weapon was held together by nothing more than the force of friction and a fragile hope that it wouldn't fall apart under pressure. The trigger mechanism, a solenoid relay designed to fire the missile electronically, was unreliable at best, firing at random intervals rather than when intended. Sometimes it would discharge a single round. Other times, it would fire 5 shots in quick succession, or not fire at all, leaving Stein to manually cycle the weapon's action between bursts to keep it operational. Despite these persistent problems, Company A had successfully achieved its objective. They had reached the foot of Mount Suribachi, an imposing volcanic summit that rose prominently from the landscape, standing at a commanding height of approximately 550 feet above sea level. From their vantage point on the slopes, Japanese sentinels and observers on the summit could see every single American emplacement along the nearby beach, giving them a significant advantage. Artillery spotters stationed on the heights directed devastating fire onto the advancing Americans, targeting their positions, trying to slow or stop their progress. Conquering Mount Suribachi was a crucial part of the mission. It was not just a tactical victory, but a strategic necessity. Control of the terrain meant denying the enemy their watch points and securing an elevated vantage point for further operations. By 5 o'clock in the evening, or 1700 hours, Stein's platoon received an order. They were to establish a defensive perimeter and hold their ground through the night. The plan was to retain their position until dawn, when a larger assault on Suribachi would be launched. Until then, the soldiers needed to reinforce their defenses, resupply ammunition and supplies, and prepare for inevitable counterattacks from the entrenched Japanese defenders. For Stein and his men, this was an interlude of tense vigilance amid chaos, a moment to regroup before continuing their relentless march uphill. Finally, Stein had a precious moment to evaluate his own battered condition. His feet were torn and bleeding, a painful consequence of marching barefoot through rough volcanic terrain and shrapnel-filled conflicts. The volcanic ash had made its way into every open wound, turning superficial cuts into infected crises that threatened his health. Shrapnel fragments had embedded themselves in his left calf and lower back. Minor injuries in terms of severity, but wounds that nonetheless demanded immediate medical attention. His hands, too, bore the scars of battle. Blisters formed from gripping the hot, temperamental Stinger missile, which had become more a burden than a weapon. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him. For the past 8 hours, he had been caught in continuous combat, running tirelessly through the rugged landscape, covering close to 3 miles in total, while carrying wounded comrades, hauling ammunition, all under heavy enemy fire, and doing so barefoot in the difficult terrain. The Stinger missile lay beside him in the fighting hole, the once mighty weapon now a wreck of its former self, its barrel bent and unusable, the receiver damaged beyond simple repair, the stock burned from enemy fire, and the trigger mechanism so unreliable that it was no longer dependable. Yet, despite its battered state, it had served its purpose. That purpose was to keep Company A moving forward when conventional weapons would have left them immobilized on the beach, unable to advance due to enemy fire and terrain. Because of this, other Marines began to nickname him the Barefoot Corporal, a nickname both for the fact he fought without shoes and for his resilience. Some of his fellow soldiers thought he was insane for risking so much. Others regarded him as the bravest man they had ever seen. Stein, however, paid no mind to these judgments. His focus was solely on what needed to be done. His decision-making had been straightforward, simple in its logic. The platoon was in dire need of fire support to sustain their assault. The battered Stinger was their best chance, providing that crucial firepower. Everything else, the injuries, the damaged weapon, the fatigue, became secondary in light of the critical support he was providing. That night, when exhaustion finally forced him to try to rest in his fighting hole, Japanese infiltrators began to test the perimeter of Company A's defenses. Small units, just 2 or 3 soldiers, crawled forward stealthily, their objective to identify weak points and exploit any vulnerabilities in the American lines. Despite his fatigue, Stein instinctively grabbed the battered Stinger missile, knowing it still held one advantage: volume of fire. When a Japanese soldier appeared merely 30 yards from his position, Stein responded instantly, firing a sustained burst from his wounded weapon. Miraculously, the weapon still functioned as it should have, unleashing a deadly spray of fire that brought the infiltrator down instantly. Despite the damage, the Stinger proved its worth one last time that night. By dawn on February 20th, the infiltrator was dead, and the danger to Stein's position was temporarily contained. Stein himself had remained awake for 22 hours straight, his body pushed to the absolute limits by the continuous combat, fatigue, and stress of survival. When morning arrived, the assault on Mount Suribachi was set to commence. At precisely 8 o'clock in the morning, or 0800 hours, Company A, alongside the rest of the 28th Marine Regiment, began their arduous ascent up the steep and treacherous volcanic slopes. The terrain was utterly brutal. Loose, sharp ash covering the ground, no vegetation to provide cover or protection, and exposed ridges that allowed Japanese observers positioned aloft to see any movement. The enemy had fortified this critical mountain with an elaborate network of over 60 pillboxes, bunkers, and cave positions, each meticulously prepared and strategically placed. Every conceivable approach to the summit was protected by interconnected fields of fire, covering all angles with deadly precision. These formidable defenses had been painstakingly constructed over months, reflecting the Japanese soldiers' determination to hold this vital position at all costs, knowing full well that capturing Mount Suribachi was essential to their overall defensive strategy. In the shadowy labyrinth of the mountains, a determined group had meticulously gathered a substantial stockpile of essential supplies. Not merely a handful of bullets or a small bag of rations, but an extensive cache of ammunition, preserved foodstuffs, and a plentiful reserve of water, carefully stored away in secluded caves and hidden alcoves within the rugged mountainous terrain. Their overarching intent was clear and resolute. They aimed not only to defend their position, but also to inflict a heavy toll on the advancing American forces, making each and every yard gained by their enemies an arduous and costly effort. The defenders were prepared to make the Americans pay a steep price for every inch that they dared to push forward, turning the difficult landscape into a battleground of attrition and resilience. Meanwhile, Stein moved with purpose, meticulously ascending the mountain's steep incline while clutching the Stinger missile launcher, an advanced portable missile system designed for quick deployment and effective anti-armor capabilities. Overnight, a skilled armorer had worked tirelessly on this weapon, replacing some of its most critical and damaged components to ensure it would function when needed most. Although the barrel of the missile launcher remained bent, a serious flaw that compromised accuracy, a new belt feed mechanism had been installed, aimed at ensuring continuous feeding of the rockets without jams or interruptions. Additionally, the solenoid trigger, an essential part of the firing mechanism that converts electrical signals into mechanical action, had been upgraded to improve reliability, so that Stein could count on the weapon to fire when commanded. Despite these repairs and modifications, the Stinger was no longer in pristine condition. The damage sustained had dulled its once devastating potential, transforming it from a terrifying weapon of destruction into a more reliable, yet less lethal tool of warfare. On the morning of February the 19th, precisely at 9:30, the soldiers of Company encountered a formidable obstacle, a heavily fortified complex nestled halfway up the southern slope of the mountain. This complex comprised no fewer than 4 concrete bunkers, interconnected by a maze of trenches and fortified passages. These reinforced positions housed multiple machine gun emplacements, manned continuously to suppress any attacking force, and mortar crews operating from concealed pits, launching indirect fire that kept the Marines on constant alert. The advance of the 28th Marine Regiment stalled suddenly amidst this fierce opposition. Progress was slow, the enemy's defenses deeply entrenched, and every movement under threat of devastating fire. In this critical moment, Stein pressed forward with his Stinger missile launcher, seeking the decisive strike. He identified the primary target, a heavily fortified bunker, the heart of the enemy's defensive network, and opened fire. Although the damage to his weapon's barrel had compromised its accuracy, Stein knew that in the close-quarters battlefield, sheer volume of fire and suppression could still be effective. His shot tore through the air, hitting its mark with enough force to harass the defenders. His frantic barrage suppressed their firing long enough for the demolition teams, so carefully coordinated and bold, to move forward with satchel charges, explosive charges designed to obliterate heavily reinforced structures. Their careful placement paid off, and the bunker was ultimately reduced to rubble, its destruction paving the way for the Marines to push further. With one strategic obstacle removed, Company A pressed on, advancing another 50 yards into the crescent of the mountain's terrain. The mission seemed to be progressing, yet the relentless fight held its grim toll. At 10:15, Stein's seemingly invincible luck took a harsh turn. Without warning, a Japanese grenade, hurled in their direction, soared through the air and landed merely 3 feet away from his position. Stein's sharp eyes caught sight of the deadly projectile just in time. Instinctively, he attempted to leap aside, to evade the impending explosion, but the grenade detonated prematurely, before he could escape the blast radius. The explosion sent shrapnel ripping through his body, striking his right arm, his right leg, and his torso with brutal precision. The wounds were numerous and severe, fragments embedded deep within his flesh, blood pouring freely from multiple sites. Despite the gravity of his injuries, none of them proved immediately fatal. However, he was bleeding profusely, rapidly losing blood and strength in the chaos of combat. Within minutes, Corman, a fellow Marine and a steadfast comrade, reached his side, quickly assessing the situation. Together, they bandaged Stein's wounded limbs as best as possible under fire and called out for emergency evacuation. But Stein, driven by a fierce sense of duty and commitment to his squad, refused to abandon his post. His platoon's ongoing fight depended on him. The stingers still held value, and the mission was not yet finished. Steadfast and resolute, Stein chose to stay and continue supporting his comrades. Over the course of the subsequent 2 hours, Stein remained at his position, providing crucial fire support despite bleeding heavily through his improvised bandages. Every burst from his weapon was aimed at suppressing enemy positions, each one saving lives and holding the line. The battered Stinger continued to operate despite the punishing conditions it endured, stubbornly enduring the onslaught it had sustained. Every time an enemy pillbox opened fire on the advancing Marines, Stein responded with a suppressive burst, keeping the defenders engaged. Whenever Japanese soldiers emerged from the trench systems, hoping to catch the Marines off guard, Stein's sustained automatic fire cut them down in rapid succession, halting their assault. However, as the hours wore on, Stein's injuries worsened. By 12:30, his condition became increasingly precarious. He was losing significant volumes of blood, his strength fading rapidly. He felt his vision narrowing, a sign that his body was betraying him due to blood loss and shock. Corman, witnessing the decline, urgently advised Stein that immediate evacuation was his only chance of survival. If no action was taken, he risked dying right there on the mountain. Recognizing the severity of his injuries and the urgency of the situation, Stein, with no further hesitation, handed his Stinger to another Marine standing nearby in his squad. Then, reluctantly but decisively, he allowed Corman to help him down the treacherous mountain slope toward the safety of the beachfront. From the beach, Stein was swiftly loaded onto a landing craft, a sturdy boat designed for amphibious operations, and transported out to a hospital ship anchored just off the coastline. There, amid the relative safety of medical care, he entered a period of recovery, surrounded by the hum of medical personnel attending to wounded soldiers and the gentle rocking of the vessel. Meanwhile, on the 21st of February, while Stein was still recuperating, the 28th Marine Regiment pressed on with their grueling assault on Mount Suribachi. The combat was brutal and unrelenting, with every inch of the mountain fiercely contested. Japanese soldiers fought tooth and nail to defend their positions, repelling every attempt to clear caves with flames and explosives, and fighting to the death rather than surrender. Every trench, every concealed passage needed to be taken through close-quarters combat, often under repeated enemy fire. Eventually, on the morning of February the 23rd, precisely at 10:20, a patrol from Company E managed to reach the summit of Mount Suribachi. With great effort, they raised a small American flag atop the peak, a symbolic gesture of victory amidst the chaos. The iconic moment was captured on film by Joseph Rosenthal, a talented photographer who documented this historic event. Later that same afternoon, a larger flag, more substantial and visible from a greater distance, was raised in its place, and Rosenthal was again present to photograph the scene. His images, both the small flag and the larger one, would go on to become some of the most recognized and enduring photographs of the Pacific Theater, symbolizing American resilience and determination in the face of fierce opposition. Tony Stein was not present at the moment when the American forces raised their national flag high above the battlefield, signaling a significant victory. Instead of witnessing this historic gesture firsthand, he remained confined to a hospital ship, a mobile medical facility anchored offshore, where he was undergoing intensive treatment for the wounds he had sustained during fierce combat. The medical team worked tirelessly to carefully remove fragments of shrapnel embedded deep within his arm, his leg, and scattered across his torso, injuries inflicted by enemy explosions that had torn through his body with savage intensity. Alongside the physical damage, Stein's medical caretakers also focused on stabilizing his condition by controlling significant blood loss and fighting against potential infections that threatened to turn his wounds into deadly afflictions. Their prognosis was hopeful but realistic. Doctors informed him that he would soon be transported to a dedicated hospital located in the rear areas of Hawaii, or perhaps farther away, back to the United States itself, where he could receive specialized care and rehabilitation. The message was clear. His active participation in the fighting was over. His war service, at least in this phase, had come to an end. Yet, on the 25th of February, an event occurred that struck Stein with such force that it surpassed even the destructive power of any grenade or bullet. News arrived aboard the hospital ship. News that pierced through the haze of pain and the fragile hope of recovery, hitting him harder than any physical injury ever could. It was learned that the 5th Marine Division had made a strategic movement northward from the imposing and iconic Mount Suribachi, pushing toward the heart of the island's interior. Their objective was a position designated simply as Hill 362, a formidable and heavily contested area. The combat there was extraordinarily fierce, characterized by relentless, gritty, hand-to-hand fighting that left few survivors unscarred. The casualties among the Marines were catastrophic. The fighting was so intense that the 28th Marines Regiment sustained losses so severe that nearly 30% of its men were killed or wounded within a mere 2 days. Among the fallen was Stein's platoon sergeant, a leader who had guided him through countless drills and battles, now lost forever. The squad leader from Stein's own unit, one of the men he had trained alongside during their time in Hawaii, was also dead, leaving a deep void among the fighting squadron. Soldiers he had once fought beside, shared meals with, and learned from, now lay silent on the blood-soaked hill in the central part of Yuma. The grim reality was that the entire unit was suffering incredible attrition, and Stein's comrades were falling amidst ash and ruins, their blood staining the earth they fought so desperately to hold. Despite the grave medical orders to remain in the safety of the hospital, Stein's determination eclipsed any concern for rules or his own well-being. On February the 26th, driven by a fierce sense of duty and an unyielding desire to rejoin his comrades in the thick of the fight, he made a bold and reckless decision to leave the hospital ship. Stepping down from the vessel, he descended into a landing craft, a small, sturdy boat used for transporting personnel from ship to shore, knowing full well that he was technically absent without official leave. He assured the boat crew that medical personnel had cleared him to go back into action. In reality, he had not been officially authorized to do so. The crew, however, made no attempt to hinder him, perhaps recognizing his unwavering resolve and the importance of his mission. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Stein reached the beach, an expanse of scorched earth, volcanic ash, and debris strewn with the remnants of fierce combat. Once ashore, he sought out a supply sergeant, a fellow Marine responsible for logistics and resource distribution, and requisitioned a new pair of combat boots. His feet were still wrapped in bandages from injuries sustained earlier, yet he could walk, barely but purposefully. Without delay, he seized a rifle from a nearby supply dump, an M1 Grand, a standard-issue rifle for American infantry. The specialized weapon he had once carried, known as a Stinger, was no longer in his possession, either destroyed during previous combat or taken by another Marine in the chaos. But that was of little consequence to him. His mind was set. He was returning to his unit, no matter the risks. Walking through the treacherous terrain of Yuma, he moved steadily northward, covering approximately 6 miles along the rugged, volcanic landscape. The path took him past scorched ruins of Japanese defensive positions, tanks that had been burned out and left as hollow shells of their former strength, and sporadic equipment scattered across the scorched ground. As he advanced, he also navigated past the grim scenes of graves registration teams, a somber sight, collecting the fallen American soldiers, their numbers overwhelming and their identities being meticulously recorded amidst the chaos. Stein's journey brought him eventually to the position held by Company A at Hill 362A on the 27th of February. The once sizable company, numbering around 240 men at the start, had been decimated. Now, only about 63 warriors remained, exhausted and drained from continuous combat. For nearly a full week, these soldiers had fought relentlessly, with no relief or respite, their bodies and minds pushed to the brink as they endured the relentless onslaught of an enemy that refused to surrender or retreat. The fighting had become grueling, each day blending into the next in a grim cycle of violence and survival. Upon arrival, Stein reported directly to the company commander, a seasoned officer tasked with the strategic planning and welfare of the fighting troops. Recognizing the dire need for every able-bodied Marine, the commander immediately placed Stein back on the front lines. The unit depended entirely on each man's skill and resolve, and Stein's return was met with a mixture of relief and concern, though there was little time for the latter. For the following 48 hours, Stein participated in the brutal, close-quarters combat typical of fighting around Hill 362A. Without the aid of his specialized weapon, the Stinger, his armament was limited to an M1 Garand rifle and a handful of grenades. The nature of the combat was different, slower and more deliberate, emphasizing careful aiming and melee tactics. Yet Stein proved his effectiveness once again. On the 1st of March, 19 Marines from Company A were assigned to a reconnaissance patrol tasked with locating fortified Japanese positions clamoring to harass the advancing regiment. Corporal Tony Stein was appointed as the assistant patrol leader, a role that placed him second in command of the small, carefully selected group. Their mission was simple in description but dangerous in execution. Advance approximately 400 yards into enemy territory, discover the positions of the Japanese defenders, pillboxes and concealed machine gun nests, and quickly return with intelligence that could guide future attacks. This was not an assault mission but purely reconnaissance, meant to gather vital information without provoking an all-out fight. At 7 o'clock in the morning on the first day of March, the patrol moved out from the lines of Company A, heading into terrain characterized by volcanic ridges and steep ravines, a landscape that proved perfect for ambushes. The Japanese had ingeniously established hidden and fortified positions across the entire area, taking advantage of caves, spider holes, and natural cover. These concealed sniper nests and machine gun positions, often camouflaged with natural materials, posed a deadly threat, turning every step into a potential trap. The team knew that meticulous caution was essential if they were to succeed in their mission and return safely with the crucial information needed to advance their company's efforts against the entrenched enemy. The patrol advanced at a deliberate and cautious pace, moving forward in measured, almost careful steps that betrayed a deep awareness of the dangers lurking nearby. Their journey stretched out over a span of 20 yards, during which every move was slow, deliberate, and calculated. Suddenly, they would come to a halt, their senses honed for any sign of enemy presence. They would stop, then carefully observe their surroundings, carefully listening for any suspicious sounds or signs of movement that might reveal the position of their adversaries. After gathering their visual and auditory information, they would continue their cautious advance for another 20 yards, repeating this pattern of slow, deliberate movement, watchfulness, and silence. The Marines knew, without doubt, that Japanese defenders were secretly watching their every move from concealed vantage points, hidden within the rugged terrain around them. The crucial question in their minds was always the same. Would the enemy choose to open fire, unleashing well-aimed rifle shots or machine gun bursts that could cut them down? It was precisely at 7:45 in the morning when the patrol finally reached a vantage point, a ridgeline that offered a commanding view of a small, intervening valley below. Once there, Stein moved purposefully to the forefront of the group, eager to get a clearer, more detailed picture of what lay ahead. His eyes swept across the terrain, peering through the jagged formations of volcanic rock which carved the landscape. From his vantage point, Stein could see what appeared to be fortified positions carefully hidden among the rocks, some of them seemingly well-camouflaged pillboxes, while others looked like entrances to underground caves or tunnels. These covert structures, potentially holding enemy troops and supplies, demanded closer inspection to confirm their true nature. Recognizing the importance of approaching cautiously yet definitively, Stein signaled for the entire patrol to advance, giving the command to move forward. He stepped ahead of his comrades, his grip steady on his weapon, an M1 Garand, ready for action at a moment's notice. His feet, still tender from the barefoot runs he had endured just 8 days earlier during reconnaissance and patrols, ached painfully with each step. Despite the pain from the shrapnel wounds that had marred his right arm and leg, wounds that had not yet fully healed, Stein pressed on because he knew that moving forward was essential. It was a matter of duty and survival. At exactly 7:52 in the morning, a sudden, sharp crack of a rifle shot shattered the morning stillness. The report was loud and startling, echoing across the rugged terrain. The bullet found its mark, striking Tony Stein directly in the head. The impact was instantaneously fatal. Stein collapsed immediately, his body succumbing to the deadly shot. The shot had originated from a concealed and well-fortified position about 200 yards northeast of the patrol's location. A small spider hole or a hidden cave entrance from which an enemy sniper had taken aim. The patrol was immediately aware that the shooter was hidden and protected, rendering their surrounding of the area in darkness. Despite their quick response, the Marines could not determine the sniper's exact location or sight the hidden attacker. Within seconds, Corporal Corman reached Stein's side, desperately trying to provide aid, but unfortunately, there was nothing that could be done. The wound was too grievous. Stein, only 23 years old, met his end amidst the volcanic ash on the island of Iwo at precisely 7:53 on the first day of March in the year 1945. The tragic news spread swiftly through the ranks of the 28th Marines, casting a pall over the entire unit. In the aftermath of Stein's death, the remaining Marines did not hesitate. With resolute determination, they turned their fire toward the suspected sniper position, their weapons sending bursts of lead in the general direction of the enemy's hideout. Recognizing the threat, the commanders called in mortar support to strike at the enemy's position with devastating firepower. Soon, the area was thoroughly saturated with high-explosive shells, exploding fiercely amidst the rocks and providing a deadly barrage designed to destroy enemy combatants and destroy their defenses. Whether the sniper itself survived the relentless pounding or not was never confirmed, as Japanese soldiers on Iwo rarely left clear evidence of their casualties, tending to conceal or abandon their fallen comrades rather than leave their bodies exposed for discovery. Despite this, the patrol successfully completed its primary mission objectives. They identified the complex of pillboxes and other fortifications that constituted a strategic stronghold, gathered valuable intelligence, and then made the decision to withdraw and return to their unit, Company A. However, they did so with a heavy heart, carrying Stein's body back with them as a somber reminder of the costs of war. News of Tony Stein's death spread quickly among the men of the 28th Marines, resonating across the battalion like a somber bell tolling. He was celebrated not only as a brave and determined soldier, but also as a figure of heroic dedication. The barefoot corporal had made an arduous journey, 8 separate trips from his shoreline to the island's interior on the bitterly cold and brutal February 19th. He was the Marine who had vehemently refused evacuation after being wounded in action, displaying incredible resilience and stubbornness in the face of danger. Coming from Dayton, Ohio, Stein was a skilled toolmaker by trade, and he had crafted a weapon from salvaged aircraft parts, a makeshift yet effective firearm, using it to destroy countless enemy positions, many of which had taken heavy losses as a result. His actions and ingenuity made him stand out among his comrades, earning him a reputation as a fearless and resourceful fighter. The day after his death, on the 2nd of March, Stein was laid to rest in the 5th Division Cemetery on Iwo Jima. A simple wooden cross marked his grave, bearing his service number, his rank, and his unit, offering a humble tribute to a young man who had given everything in service of his country. Yet, notably absent from the gravestone was any mention of his heroic act involving the improvised weapon or the Medal of Honor, awarded later and bearing his name, serving as silent reminders of his extraordinary bravery. The fierce battle for Iwo Jima continued for another 3.5 weeks after Stein's death, with relentless fighting across the island. The combat remained exceedingly brutal and costly. The Marines of the 28th pushed steadily northward, systematically cleansing cave complexes and entrenched positions from the enemy's hold. As the fighting raged on, American casualties mounted. By the time the island was officially declared secure on the 26th of March, the toll had been devastating. Almost 7,000 Americans dead and 20,000 wounded. Japanese losses were even worse. Of the 21,000 soldiers defending Iwo Jima, fewer than 1,000 managed to survive, many of them either dying in their positions or choosing suicide over surrender. Beneath the island, the labyrinthine tunnel systems became sites of mass graves, burial sites for those who had fallen in the hellish fighting. But on that historic day of February 19th, amid the chaos and destruction, Tony Stein and his improvised weapon had made a tangible difference. His barefoot runs had saved the lives of 9 wounded Marines, preventing their deaths on the treacherous beach, and in doing so, his courage and ingenuity carved a piece of heroic history amid the fiercest battles of the Pacific theater. His relentless, suppressive gunfire created a vital opening that allowed Company A to push forward, advancing through hostile territory when other units found themselves immobilized and unable to move due to the relentless enemy fire that pinned them down in place. This remarkable act of courage and tactical sharpness was not merely a fluke, but the result of his extraordinary mechanical ingenuity, which had led him to craft a weapon of exceptional effectiveness. Such ingenuity had given the Marine Corps a formidable new tool, a weapon that for a single day dramatically altered the tactical landscape of the battlefield, providing a decisive advantage that proved crucial in the moment of intense combat. This weapon, known to some as the Stinger, was not the product of official military design, but rather the brainchild of inventive minds. 2 men in particular, Mel Grevich and John Little, who each contributed to the construction of additional units beyond the original. Together, they built 5 more of these Stingers, each representing a testament to creativity and resourcefulness amid wartime necessity. These weapons saw active service during the fierce fighting on Iwo Jima, a campaign that tested the resilience of both men and machine. Unfortunately, war's brutality claimed 2 of these Stingers early on when they were destroyed by enemy fire, reducing the number in existence. Another of the units became completely inoperable after overheating, jamming permanently and rendering it useless. The remaining two survived the intense combat environment, standing through the chaos and destruction, only to be lost in the aftermath of the war when all equipment was hastily disposed of and military surplus was often destroyed or abandoned. Today, none of the original 6 Stinger devices remain preserved. They were classified and handled as non-standard, field-modified equipment, tools and weapons not officially issued or sanctioned, which in military tradition are typically destroyed rather than maintained for posterity. Despite their physical absence, the legend of the Stinger persisted, woven into the fabric of Marine Corps history and lore. Tales about its creation, its daring use in combat, and its unconventional design circulated among armorers and mechanics who understood the ingenuity involved. They remembered the story of the toolmaker from Ohio, the man who had salvaged aircraft machine guns and transformed them into versatile infantry weapons, creating an innovative tool that temporarily shifted the balance of power on the battlefield. He was the kind of soldier who, in the midst of chaos and danger, ran barefoot across volcanic ash to ensure his platoon was supplied with ammunition and firepower. When wounded, he refused evacuation, choosing instead to remain with his fellow Marines, demonstrating unwavering commitment and bravery. When should have been sent to a field hospital, he made the determination to return to the fight, driven by a fierce sense of duty and resolve that refused to let injury halt his participation in the battle. The extraordinary deeds of this man, Tony Stein, did not go unnoticed. They culminated in a recognition that would forever etch his name into history. In May of 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson authored a formal recommendation advocating that Tony Stein be awarded the Medal of Honor, the United States military's highest decoration for valor. This recommendation was based on Stein's heroic actions on February the 19th of that year, actions which vividly exemplified bravery and self-sacrifice. The report detailed his remarkable 8 trips to the shoreline, repeatedly risking his life to evacuate wounded Marines, destroying strategic enemy positions, and making daring barefoot runs through enemy fire. Every officer who reviewed the document, the officers of the regiment, the division, the Fleet Marine Force, and even the command at Pacific Theater, endorsed the recommendation without hesitation. It was a unanimous consensus. Corporal Tony Stein had demonstrated conspicuous gallantry and extraordinary bravery, risking his life in a manner that went far beyond what was expected of him, showing heroism that was truly above and beyond the call of duty. Exactly 1 year after Stein's courageous actions at Iwo Jima, on the 19th of February, the nation gathered for a momentous occasion. At the Ohio State House, Joan Stein, his widow, stood proudly as she received on his behalf the Medal of Honor, a decoration symbolizing the highest recognition for valor that a soldier could receive. The ceremony was a poignant event, led by Ohio's governor, Frank Lucier, who presented the medal with solemn pride. Joan Stein, overwhelmed by the weight of the medal and the flood of memories it invoked, stood silently in her husband's office, her emotions swelling as she holding the symbol of her husband's heroism. Accompanying her was Rose, Tony's mother, who attended with tears streaming down her face, overcome by a mixture of pride and grief. Her son, an immigrant's child born to Jewish parents, who had left high school early to work as a toolmaker, had risen to receive the nation's highest military honor. It was a moment charged with emotional weight, a recognition of a life dedicated to service and sacrifice. The official citation accompanying Stein's Medal of Honor provided a vivid account of his heroic deeds. He was the first member of his unit to be on station after the initial assault hit the beaches. Armed with a weapon he had personally improvised from aircraft parts, he provided swift and accurate covering fire, enabling his fellow Marines to move into position amid the chaos. When his comrades became stalled by enemy machine guns and mortar fire concentrated on their positions, Stein's courage shone even brighter. He stood upright amidst the gunfire, exposing himself deliberately to enemy view in order to draw the enemy's fire toward himself. This daring act allowed him to pinpoint the location of the hostile guns, blazing furiously from their positions. Determined to neutralize these strategically placed enemies, Stein boldly charged into enemy pillboxes one after another. His courageous assault resulted in the killing of 20 enemy soldiers during a fierce, nearly single-handed fight, a testament to his bravery, tactical recklessness, and unwavering resolve to eliminate threats that endangered his men. Through these acts, Tony Stein's actions not only exemplified extraordinary personal valor, but also demonstrated an instinct to prioritize the safety and success of his entire unit over his own safety, embodying the very spirit of heroism that the Medal of Honor seeks to honor. These stories remind us of how individual acts of exceptional bravery can shift the tide of battle and inspire generations to come, forever ingraining the names and deeds of such remarkable soldiers into the annals of history. The narrative extended over an additional 3 paragraphs, providing in-depth details about each of Tony Stein's 8 courageous excursions to the beach, the wounded Marines he heroically evacuated amidst relentless danger, and his steadfast refusal to seek medical treatment for his injuries despite the pain and risk involved. It also mentioned a personally improvised weapon inspired by aircraft parts, although it deliberately avoided mentioning the specific name Stinger, which remained a part of Marine Corps oral tradition rather than official documentation. The remains of Tony Stein remained on the island of Iwo until the year of 1948, when in December they were transported back to Dayton, Ohio, for a funeral befitting a hero, complete with full military honors. The solemn ceremony took place at Our Lady of the Rosary Church and was attended by hundreds of mourners, veterans, family members, and civilians alike, many of whom had never met him personally, but who understood the significance of what he represented. He was laid to rest in Calvary Cemetery, the sole recipient of the Medal of Honor from Dayton during the Second World War. His grave marker proudly bore his rank, his unit designation, and the prestigious decoration he had earned through his acts of bravery. Even decades later, visitors continued to leave small tokens, such as coins and tiny American flags, at his gravesite, honoring his memory and sacrifice. In the year of 1972, the United States Navy officially honored Tony Stein's extraordinary service by commissioning a Knox-class frigate named USS Stein in his honor. This vessel served for over 2 decades, undertaking operations across the vast waters of the Pacific and Indian Oceans, demonstrating the enduring legacy of his heroism. The ship was decommissioned in the year of 1993 and eventually dismantled and scrapped. However, the name Tony Stein persisted within naval records and histories, serving as a lasting tribute to his valor. The Marine Corps further preserved his story by incorporating it into training materials and historical accounts, ensuring that future generations of Marines would learn about his exemplification of the Corps' values. At the famous recruit training depot on Parris Island, where new Marines begin their service, instructors include stories such as Tony Stein's as part of the essential curriculum on improvisation and adaptation in combat situations. His story is used as a prime example for recruits to understand the importance of resourcefulness and resilience when standard equipment or tactics fail. Stein's resourcefulness was epitomized by his creation of a formidable weapon from salvaged aircraft parts, an improvised device that changed the course of small unit engagements. He was a Marine who, barefoot and amidst volcanic ash, ran tirelessly to save his comrades, demonstrating incredible courage and determination. The weapon, often referred to in histories of military firearms as the Stinger, became legendary, symbolizing ingenuity and the relentless spirit of innovation among warfighters facing dire circumstances. Ian McCallum of the renowned Forgotten Weapons publication documented the design, development, and historical significance of the weapon. His work was complemented by the Canadian Historical Arms Museum, which built a functional replica for educational purposes, illustrating what Stein and his fellow Marine Grevich had accomplished through their mechanical ingenuity and resourcefulness. These 2 men had taken an aircraft-mounted machine gun, originally designed for firing at 300 miles per hour in airstreams, and ingeniously adapted it for ground combat use. By creatively repurposing salvaged aircraft parts and relying on their mechanical skills, they addressed a crucial problem faced by the Marine Corps: how to deliver sufficient firepower in close-quarters battle. While military historians have debated the tactical significance of the Stinger, with some arguing that its impact was limited, especially considering that only 6 such weapons existed within a single regiment. That perspective overlooks the vital difference each weapon made to the Marines fighting alongside them. Those 6 weapons, fired with a rate of approximately 1,200 rounds per minute, created a suppressive fire that often allowed troop advances which might otherwise have been stalled. The psychological effect of such rapid and relentless gunfire, keeping enemy heads down during critical moments, cannot be underestimated. The true measure of Stein's legacy, however, is his unmatched bravery. His 8 dangerous trips under fire, during which he evacuated 9 wounded Marines. His barefoot runs through volcanic ash to save his comrades. His refusal to be evacuated when wounded, choosing instead to return from a hospital ship to rejoin his unit, and leading a patrol that ultimately cost him his life. Each of these acts exemplifies the very essence of Marine Corps values. Tony Stein, the barefoot Marine from Dayton, Ohio, embodies something more profound, a symbol of perseverance, ingenuity, and indomitable spirit. His story underscores the core Marine principle of improvise, adapt, overcome. When traditional tools and equipment proved ineffective, he and others like him built something better from what was available. When wounded, he refused to give up. Instead, he kept fighting, inspiring everyone around him. His life story is more than just a tale of battlefield heroism. It is a testament to the unwavering resolve and resourcefulness that define the Marine Corps ethos, an enduring example passed down through generations to reinforce that, in moments of crisis, the best weapon is often the unwavering human spirit and the ability to improvise under pressure. When the order is given to rest, it is essential to return promptly to your designated unit, resuming your post in the ongoing effort to defend and serve. Conversely, when confronted with seemingly insurmountable obstacles, overwhelming enemy forces that appear too formidable to overcome, the brave decision to press forward becomes not just a choice, but a testament to unwavering courage and resilience. One such extraordinary example of heroism was demonstrated by Tony Stein, a young man who had just celebrated his 23rd birthday when he met his ultimate sacrifice. He had dedicated just over 2 years and 5 months of his life to serving as a Marine, engaging in fierce combat on 2 different Pacific islands during the intense and brutal campaigns of World War II. Throughout his service, he inflicted greater casualties upon the enemy than any official records have been able to precisely document, a testament to his relentless determination and skill under fire. On a single day during his service, he managed to save the lives of 9 fellow soldiers, risking everything to ensure their survival amid the chaos of battle. Remarkably, all of his acts of heroism were carried out with a weapon he had personally helped to develop and assemble in a modest maintenance shed located on the Hawaiian Islands, demonstrating not only his valor, but his inventive spirit and dedication to his craft. If this story of Tony Stein's extraordinary bravery resonates with you, just as it has deeply moved us, I kindly ask you to consider supporting this narrative. Please press the like button, a simple gesture that signals to others and to platforms like YouTube that this story deserves greater recognition and sharing. Every single one of these likes acts as a message, encouraging the dissemination of stories about ordinary individuals who became extraordinary heroes through their actions. It helps us reach new audiences and ensures that such tales are preserved and honored. Additionally, I invite you to subscribe and activate notifications so you can continue to explore and learn about more unsung heroes and remarkable stories that might otherwise fade into obscurity. Each day, we dedicate ourselves to unearthing and rescuing stories buried within dusty archives. Stories about toolmakers, mechanics, and Marines who, with nothing more than salvaged aircraft guns and barefooted courage, performed acts of heroism that defy the odds. These are stories about real people who faced real danger and exhibited true heroism in the face of adversity. Feel free to share a comment right now, telling us where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or perhaps elsewhere around the globe? Our community stretches across every continent and nation, bringing diverse individuals together through shared appreciation for bravery and sacrifice. Remember, you are not merely a passive viewer. You are an active participant in keeping these vital stories alive for future generations. Let us know your location, mention if someone in your family has served in the military, or simply share your connection to these stories. Your voice matters. Thank you sincerely for taking the time to watch and for helping ensure that Tony Stein's legacy does not fade into silence or obscurity. These men, these heroes, deserve to be remembered and honored, and through your support and engagement, you play an essential role in preserving their memory. Your actions contribute significantly to ensuring that their sacrifices and remarkable deeds continue to inspire others for many years to come.